Welcome to News 18 Global. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. Let's begin with our top focus on Niger. There's a new government which has been formed there. Who stands to gain out of the coup and the subsequent new junta which has formed the government? Let's dive in deeper in terms of what has happened today. The leaders of a coup in Niger have now declared a new government. They named 21 ministers as part of their government. The move comes as leaders of the West African bloc, the Economic Community of West African States or ECOWAS, are meeting to consider steps against the military junta. After hours-long meeting, the junta declared the new government, and Prime Minister Ali Mahaman Lamine Zeine, a civilian economist who will be leading the 21-member government with generals from the new military governing council heading the defense and interior ministries. These were the important, significant decisions taken today as far as the new government is concerned. Now, the move also comes as leaders of the West African bloc, the ECOWAS, came together today to consider steps against this junta. It was the second emergency summit on the coup in Niger after the country's military chiefs opposed their earlier threat to use force to restore democracy. Remember, this emergency summit is still on at the moment as we speak. In an opening speech to heads of state of the 15-member ECOWAS, Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu said, and let me quote, "It's crucial that we prioritize diplomatic negotiations and dialogue as the bedrock of our approach." He called on the bloc's leaders to act with a sense of urgency. This meeting could also prove to be the most significant moment in this standoff so far. Now, the bloc's leaders are expected to agree on next steps. What could those next steps mean, which could also, in fact, include military intervention, something an ECOWAS official has also indicated would be their last resort. And with that, let me bring you a report.
In reaffirming our relentless commitment to democracy, human rights, and the well-being of the people of Niger, it is crucial that we prioritize diplomatic negotiations and dialogue as the bedrock of our approach. I'm confident that the second ECOWAS Extraordinary Summit today on the socio-political situation in Niger will be a defining moment in our journey towards a stronger, more resilient, and integrated West Africa. Let us seize this opportunity to make a lasting impact on the lives of our fellow Africans.
All right, senior journalist Fred Ware joins me live. Thank you so much, Fred, for joining in. As we speak, the emergency summit of the ECOWAS is still on, but the military junta has announced this new government and the emergency summit is also on. Is there hope for any diplomatic path? How do you assess the situation going forward?
Well, for Russia, this is an opportunity to, if you talk to most Russians, sorry, yes?
Yes, go ahead, Fred.
If you talk to most Russian experts, they see it as a chance of payback, you know. They feel the United States and West have been meddling in their region all along, engineering regime changes and promoting a Western agenda. So in one sense, this is the revival of Cold War geopolitical meddling on a big scale. And the Russians, I guess, will enthusiastically engage in it. On the other hand, you're dealing with issues that are indigenous there in the Sahel region. There are long-standing complaints about French overlordship, about now lately there in Niger, for example, huge American drone base where they dominate the anti-terrorist campaign of the entire region from. There's crushing poverty. Niger is one of the poorest countries on earth. And so you have all the combustible elements there. And in the present situation with the Ukraine war going on and Russian-Western relations at the lowest ebb I've ever seen them, there is virtually no chance for diplomacy, for sensible, rational people to sit down and work out a way forward here. I'm afraid that we're headed for war and proxy war there in Africa.
Interesting you mentioned about Russia's gains, because the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has also spoken about how Wagner is taking advantage of the instability in Niger. We know that Russia is gaining, but how do you assess US's loss? Is this not just a loss which US could have averted with perhaps a more timely presence, or is there any hope for the United States and the UN going forward as far as their peacekeeping missions are also concerned?
Yes, you see, the rhetoric coming out of Washington is a mirror image of the things they say in Moscow. And it depends what place in the world you're talking about. They will point fingers and accuse the other of trying to take advantage. And indeed, it's I think in both cases pretty true. The problem is that both sides are dug in their respective highly competitive positions, and institutions that formerly used to have some sway, like the United Nations you mentioned, are virtually powerless. When you look at the events in Africa in the last year or so, like coups and breakdowns and wars, it does represent an unraveling of the global system generally.
Right. Fred, you also mentioned the French presence. The security situation in the Sahel region, of course, as we know, remains complex, daunting, and not improving. Most of the entire stretch is now, in fact, dominated by a military dictatorship. Why has intervention by Western leaders failed in the Sahel region?
That's a complicated question. You know, the United States 20 years ago launched this war on terror, and we know the results in the Middle East. But less known is the rather large-scale involvement in Africa. Right across the continent, you have American militarization of problems that I think are probably essentially social and ethnic and religious in those regions. But the Americans will militarize problems. And they have done that in the Sahel region and in larger swaths of Africa. And we see this. I mean, can we point to any successes of the American war on terrorism in the past 2 decades? In most places, they have simply made things worse, and sometimes catastrophically so.
Right, I do agree with you, and I'll have to leave it at that. Fred, thank you so much for joining in with your precious inputs. Appreciate as always.